So I've been thinking about this idea for a while. It's around mental health. So mental health has been a pretty big topic for a while now. So even before the pandemic, my psychologist friend was actually telling me that there was already an epidemic happening before the pandemic. And it was the increase of mental health crises, both in adults and kids. And so the thing that I've been noticing even recently after the pandemic with conversations around mental health is it feels like there's something missing. A lot of what you see happening around mental health awareness and fundraising and the nonprofits towards that, they're really going towards mental health treatment once somebody has already gone down the road of then hitting their crisis point. And so a lot of the conversation is also around how do we destigmatize having conversations around mental health. So if we look at the math of if for everything that anyone is doing in the space of mental health, what would happen if they're all wildly successful today? Like what would we see in terms of the numbers and the math, right? And so when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about how much do I understand about if we are supporting all of these nonprofits, supporting all of these groups that are really benefiting mental health, how does that change the dynamic of the problem that we're creating in the first place? So if so many of the solutions and so many of the things that we're putting forward for mental health awareness is just having conversations about them, destigmatizing, and then getting people connected after they've reached their crisis point. And I know that, like, in terms of mental health, it covers that term covers a wide range of things. So the specific things that I'm concerned about is that range of challenges that aren't medical. So they're not the medical diagnoses of like schizophrenia, things like that. So when I think about that range of challenges that might apply to a larger portion of people in the general population, I'm thinking about what are those solutions that we're putting forward that address what happens in the beginning. And so to me, it's something like, let's say, you know, the wildfires were a big problem in California years ago, right? Pretty recently. That to me, it's like the equivalent of, yes, fires are a problem. How do we deal with the smoke? Versus how do we deal with the things that are causing fires in the first place? And that's what it feels like to me when I'm scanning the things that are put forward during Mental Health Awareness Month. So I started to think about the math of mental health, that when it comes to an individual, any person's experience in any given community, what happens throughout their lives that lead them down a certain path where they might experience this more than someone else. And so Jordan Peterson gave an interview to The Telegraph, which is a British newspaper, and he gave this interview in July of 2023, this year, and he has this line that I want to read, and he frames it up really well. So he said that mental health is ill-conceived because we think of mental health as something that is subjective and internal, but it's not. It's the harmonious balancing of a network of relationships to yourself, but also to other people. And it's the harmony that's the health. And so when I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about the math of someone's life, you can quantify the number of relationships that a person might have in their lifetime. That's probably something that we could count pretty easily. And for most people, they don't choose who their moms and dads are. You don't choose where you're born into. Knowing where your parents live and which community that you're born into, you could probably approximate mathematically the number of relationships that person will have and how they'll form based on the schools that they'll go to, those types of relationships that form just by being a part of that community. And when you think about that so many of what we choose, so much of what we think is normal, possible, good, right and wrong comes from our environments, our social network. When you think about it, then how much of our choices really are coming from that open field, like of all possible choices in your life, how much of it do we actually get to choose from versus how much of it is actually getting narrowed by the environment that we're born into and the relationships then that are possible in our lives based on where we're born into. And so I was thinking about this in reading a friend's book. He documented in his book relationships that he's made in his lifetime and people and what they've achieved through the challenges in their lives and the specific circumstances of their lives. And there's one theme that keeps coming up in all of those stories, and that one relationship can change the trajectory of your life. So when you think about dysfunction, like in a family, in a community, if someone is born into dysfunction, what happens to them in terms of the possibilities, the mathematical possibilities of them being mentally healthy? They might be pretty low, right? But the thing is that then how do you solve that? That's a huge problem. Like, do you fix everyone who has a challenge in any community? Like, how would you begin to do that? So we have this system where parents, adults, people, we have kids. We don't fix our problems before we become parents. Teachers don't fix their problems before they become teachers. But by virtue of the way we live, the choices we make, the way we handle challenges, we are teaching the next generation of people, right? And so what does it look like to solve mental health in terms of those terms? Like, how do you catch it so early upstream that you're addressing where it actually starts? And that seems impossible when you think about it. But the thing is, when I start to look at it mathematically, that yes, we're born into situations that we don't choose, but throughout the course of life, how might we change the trajectory of someone's future? And to me, I think what's missing in the math of all of this is two kinds of metrics. One metric, so we count metrics in terms of, in a population of people who experience things, what are the outcomes that we might affect in their lives? You know, if somebody's has the flu, what number of people get the flu and how many survive after they, get treatment for the flu. So we count metrics when it comes to health things like that. But when it comes to the metrics for mental health, I think there's two metrics that are missing. One of them is a participation metric. So I learned something in marketing that kind of blew my mind. I got my MBA after I was an engineer for many years, but it was something that I learned in marketing that really blew my mind. It was this acronym ATAR, A-T-A-R. And so in engineering, we think of, we code up a great solution, we code up a great product, a great answer. And as an engineer, you think because that awesome thing exists, it should solve the problem that it was meant to solve, right? But the thing in marketing is that just because something exists, it doesn't mean it's going to get used. So the ATAR model in marketing is awareness, trial, adoption, and repeat. So in business school, when you're calculating out your business plan and estimating how successful will this product be in the market, you're not guessing that 100% of people that need your product are going to use it. You're actually guessing that a smaller number of that 100% of all possible people will use it. And so ATAR, this model is useful because you have to navigate through the math of start with that largest number, start with everybody possible, and reduce from that the number of people who will be aware of your solution. So let's say out of 100% of all people, can you make 10% of them aware that your solution even exists? And then out of that 10%, the trial number, T, how many can you actually get to try out your product? And out of the number that, let's say, out of the 100%, then you're left with 5%. Out of that remaining 5%, how many can you get to actually adopt your product, that'll actually buy it? And then once you get that number, that small number, what's left over after that, the smallest number out of that is how many can you get to repeat that behavior? to keep buying your product. And so we create business plans around this idea that out of everybody possible who might use it, we know that a very small number will actually adopt it and keep buying it. And so when I think of mental health in that same way, that we might have all these great solutions, that we might have all of these things that are available to all of the people who might experience mental health challenges one day, how many people will actually end up using it? What is the math that we need to navigate to get people to the point of being aware, trying it, adopting it, and then repeat that behavior? And so the metric I think that's missing in the math of mental health is a participation metric, in that for anybody in their lives, what can we affect so that they're participating in the things that would lead to a healthier network? So this kind of goes back to that quote that I referenced with Jordan Peterson, is that the choices that we make when we construct our friend circles, our social circles, they can seem pretty haphazard at times, right? Sometimes it's by accident, based on the schools we go to, where we end up working, where we might go to church. Those are usually the factors that will affect how we construct our social networks. But how might we create opportunities in our communities and society where people get to participate in different things, get to expand the pool of people that they construct their social networks out of? And so that's what I'm talking about when I think about a participation metric, is that for not just for people who are born into situations of privilege or where they might benefit from certain advantages, like just being born into a family that's like upper middle class income. Like, how can we make it so that for anybody in any situation, in any community, that we can create opportunities for them to participate in things, that they get exposed to more people, have a broader pool of people to construct their social networks out of? So I think that's one aspect of the math of mental health that's missing, is how can we start to look at things for any person, that they can participate in more solutions, get exposed to larger, more diverse pools of people to construct their social networks out of. And so that's one aspect of it. So let's assume that then that people can construct their social networks out of a broader pool of people. Then how does that affect their ultimate mental health? And so when I think about the math of mental health, then I think about if somebody is a hopeful person, or if they're a hopeless person, how has that sense of hopelessness or hopefulness resulted from the cumulative relationships that they've had in their lives? And so this is what I'm very curious about when it comes to the math of mental health, is that what might we understand about people and their state of mental health? And if we define it by general hopelessness or hopefulness, how can we understand how they've come to that point, how they experience their daily lives based on their history of relationships, that their entire social network, and how that's been constructed or deconstructed over time? And so when I think about this in terms of a general adult, a working adult's daily experience, and this is why I'm so passionate about the workplace, is because the workplace is that one place where so many of your social connections are made when you become a working adult. And how many of us lose our childhood friendships, or even our close familial relationships, because we've moved for work, or we've become displaced because of a job or for business. And then the workplace becomes this disproportionately large influence on an individual's mental health. And so what happens then for the math of mental health when so much of your social network is constructed by people whose incentives are aligned based on workplace rules, like your bosses, your coworkers, people that you might compete with, or people that you have workplace conflict with? And so when you think of that, like the math of relationships in the workplace, the odds of you having a contentious relationship with someone just because you're in the workplace, you're competing for resources, or you're competing for performance ratings, or workplaces are just places where conflict tends to be a norm. And so what happens then to the math of mental health when that's your primary pool of where you're constructing your main relationships and who you spend the most time with? So when you think about a participation metric like that in the workplace, then we can kind of dive into how our workplace is disproportionately affecting our opportunities to participate in other things, so that we can construct healthier communities, construct a healthier social network. And I like this idea when it comes to that harmonious balancing of a network of relationships. We need to be able to participate in more things, not just in the things that are the social networks that come from the places that our kids go to school, or the things that are happening at work. We need more freedom and space to construct real relationships with people that extend beyond the workplace, beyond those types of incentives. And so that's when I think about the math of mental health then, is how can we increase participation across the board for students, for working people, for retired people, that we increase the participation in those social groups and in creating opportunities to connect and creating opportunities to build real relationships, meaningful relationships. And so this affects that idea that we talked about the two vulnerabilities of any leader, that we're constantly asking ourselves, are we safe and are we good? And if we can add relationships in our lives where we have relationships that come from different environments, where we can construct an idea of what makes us good and worthy and safe from relationships that come from then your immediate community, your communities of interest and outside of the workplace, that's when we have a much better chance mathematically of constructing a social network that gives us better odds of being mentally healthy. So I think that's where I see the math of mental health, is that I want to start asking those questions for the people who are concerned with mental health, who are trying to affect mental health, is that if we do a perfect job at this one thing, how does that change the math? Does that change the social construction of someone's daily experience? Does that change their environment fundamentally, so that if someone is dealing with their personal problems and we put them back in the environment that created those problems, how does that affect what we're doing overall for mental health overall? My wife has a cousin who did her graduate work in social work, and she focused her work specifically in the juvenile system, with kids who were coming out of the juvenile system. And she said something that rang a bell in my head, that what she saw when kids would come out of the juvenile system and you get them connected with resources that help them work through addiction, a lot of their challenges, mental health challenges, but then you just put them back in the same environments where they started, that's when you see the cycle repeat. And it's worse than that, because when you put them back in an environment that hasn't fundamentally changed, they get even more hopeless, because they end up feeling the same things that they just overcame. They end up doing the same things that they just overcame. And so the challenge gets bigger, and more hopeless. And so that's where I think I would love to engage leaders more in the math of mental health. How are we affecting the composition of communities, the composition of social networks that leads to those downstream mental health challenges? This goes back to the video that we did about the small math of big change. That if we get more people participating in things, more people freed up from the desperation and the busyness of the workplace, then how might we use all of those resources to create more opportunities for people to participate in things, to create a healthier social network? I think it's mind-blowing math, and to me it's very possible, but those are the conversations I'd love to have with leaders who are trying to affect mental health.